Ashlam, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just figuring out. Okay, thank you, Manisha. Thank you, John, for joining again. It's always a pleasure to see you here on the screen. So, and today I also have the privilege to introduce you. So, thank you everyone for joining this session. And now today we have Joan Marston joining us, and she always says that she'll never get tired of talking about children. And for me, it is always I'll never get tired of saying this one statement. Whenever I write an email to John, I find myself feeling so calm and so happy. I don't know. I realized it after some time that okay, every time it comes back, that when I say when I write dear John, it's something like okay, I see her in somewhere there smiling and reading my email. So that's the kind of connection I feel with John. So it's my pleasure today to introduce you to Joan Marston. She was the CEO of International Children's Palliative Care Network for long time, and she is so interested in palliative care and humanitarian crisis also. So, and she was with us for many sessions talking about children's palliative care and also for about palliative care and humanitarian crises. So she is the co-founder of, I'm just getting the organization's name. It's called PALCHASE, which is Palliative Care and Humanitarian Aids in Patients and Emergencies. And so happy to have you here today, John. Thank you so much for joining us. So floor is open to you to talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ashla, and thank you, Manisha. It's always a delight and a joy to be here with you. And today we're going to be talking about the vulnerabilities of children looking in the broader context of palliative care, because I think we all know and understand that children are inherently vulnerable because first of all, because they're often small, they're weak. Even when they're growing and developing, they don't have the same access to power and authority that we have as adults. And so we as adults have this absolute responsibility to protect children and to care for them within a framework of children's rights. And so I'm going to try and share my screen, but Ashla knows that I'm very technologically challenged. So mine is open. I'm going to open the screen share. Can you see this?
Yes, ma'am.
And you see, oh, I'm so pleased. That's
yes, it's very much visible. Maybe you can do slideshow.
I usually struggle a little bit. And so today I was given a broad range of subjects to talk about. And even within this range, there are many issues around vulnerabilities that I will have to miss simply because of the time constraints. So I would ask that you put questions into the chat or save them for later on, and I will try and answer them at that stage. So just really to go back to the definition of palliative care for children. And my favorite definition, as so many of you know, is the one of Matti Stepanek. Matti was one of 4 children to be born with a rare genetic condition. His 3 siblings died, and his mother developed this condition as well. And it led to progressive muscular disability. But he was also one of those wise old souls that we so often see in children's palliative care. He called himself a poet, and he was. He wrote 5 volumes of heart songs. And he said, each one of us have a heart song, and we need to express it. And he was also a philosopher. He was a friend of President Jimmy Carter. He was a friend of Oprah Winfrey, and he was a friend to many. And his definition is that palliative care is no longer about dying well. It means helping children to live well, and when the time is certain, to die gently. And I think that is a beautiful definition, and a definition we can apply across all ages, from the neonate to the elderly. And that's what we try to do in palliative care, by relieving suffering to help them live well and to die gently. So one of the questions I was asked to address is, what is the difference between adult and children's palliative care? And of course, the main difference is the child. The child in every stage, from that little newborn to the toddler who is learning and experiencing the world, to that child who starts going to school and learns structure, to the adolescents with all their questions and emotions and angers. So if we look at children compared to adults in palliative care, the number that we see is relatively small. But of course, it very much depends on the percentage of children within your population. So in some countries, the percentage of children will be below 20%. But in many developing countries, and I see in India, the percentage is up to 50%, and in some African countries, even greater than 50%. So the numbers that we're going to see will be depending on our country. But certainly in India, you have a large number, and with our ICPC and UNICEF research that we did some years ago, we were looking at least 6 million children in India requiring palliative care, and probably more. And then, of course, there are those conditions that we only see in childhood, because these children don't live to adulthood. And we need to remember that. So often it's the physicians, the clinicians, who are frightened of caring for children, because working in adult palliative care, they don't see these children. The time scale is often different. So we may have these children for many years in our palliative care programs, and they may then progress into adult palliative care programs. So we're often in adult palliative care, and because I'm also helping in adult palliative care, we often see adults for a very short period of time. But children we may see from the time that they're born into the time that they are young adults. And many of the conditions are genetic. And so we may see one child, and then a few years later, we may see another child in the same family. And I've a few times seen up to 4 children within the same family with the same condition. And then, of course, the medications. You know, we have a greater understanding of how they work in adulthood, but when that child who's growing and developing, the way that their bodies handle the medications differs. And this is Joan, who has Pompey's disease, and this is one of his medications and all the possible side effects. So in that one little body, we have to look out for this huge list of possible side effects. And then, of course, childhood development, and we're going to be looking at that in more detail today, because children are developing physically, and we talk about normal childhood development. They're developing emotionally, they're developing in their understanding, which means that their medical and their social needs, they grow and they develop. And so with children, we have to be on our toes the whole time, because we start understanding and dealing with that baby, and then as they become a toddler, our own understanding has to grow and develop. And so this is the real challenge to us in palliative care, is learning and understanding about that child with a normal childhood development, but also understanding how their disease and their social condition can impact on the way that they developed. So some develop very early into these wise old souls with a deep understanding of what is happening to them. And then we have others whose whole development is slowed down by their illness. And then, of course, when we're dealing with children, we're dealing with the whole family. And that family might be a biological family, but it might also be the family of the community, and those children who are rejected, because in many cultures, children with any kind of abnormalities are seen as being bewitched. And certainly even in South Africa, we are still seeing children who are left out to die because of their disabilities, or where there are multiple, like twins or triplets or quadruplets, the belief that there is bewitchment and the healthiest is kept and the others are either rejected, best case scenario, or worst case scenario, they are allowed to die. And then we've talked about development, so I'm not going to go into that issue again now, but we need to remember education and play, whether they are seriously ill or whether they are not, are absolutely essential to children. And whatever programs that we have caring for these children must include an element of development, because even though we know they may only live till they're about 4 or 5, we want them within those 4 or 5 years to develop as much as possible, as well as possible, and to play, because play is how a child learns and develops. And then how they express their traumatic experiences. This is quite extreme, and this came out of Syria, and things that children should not experience, but do, they often express best through drawing. So as I said in the beginning, we need to remember that when we provide palliative care for children, we are always giving it within 2 frameworks. And the one is within the framework of childhood development, and the other is within the framework of children's rights. And of course, the main convention about children's rights is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child that all countries have signed up to. And then they have taken those rights and they've put them into law in their own country. So each country and perhaps each state will have their own laws, but these all come from this foundation convention and this global understanding that a child has rights in their own development. And that those rights for children, where with adults our rights are often progressive, they are linked to resources. With children, their rights are immediate. So we don't say, but we haven't got the resources, so we can't protect these children. We actually have to provide these immediate protective rights to every child. And we know that children with life-threatening or life-limiting illnesses, children with disabilities, are more vulnerable to abuse. And that abuse can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be sexual, and something I haven't added in here, and which I should have, is they can be spiritual as well. Abuse within the family is often difficult to identify. And it's difficult because the child does not want to report it. They don't want to be taken away from their parents. Their parents are their primary source of support. So they know and they understand that if they report this abuse, they're going to be taken away from the safe and secure environment and the people that they know. So we have to be very aware when we're providing palliative care in the community, which of course so much of our palliative care is that if we pick up the potential, the possibility of abuse, certainly in South Africa, we have a legal obligation to report it. It's not a thing that we can say, oh, I'll keep my eyes open. We actually have this very difficult situation where we must report suspected abuse as well, because it must be investigated. And then that leads us to many ethical challenges that we have, is where is the best place for this child? And so we need to know that these rights are always linked to their vulnerabilities. Spiritually, they are very vulnerable. And we know that some religions are very protective and supportive of the child, but there are some religious and spiritual beliefs that can be harmful. They are linked to the vulnerabilities of a mind that is growing and developing and experiencing, and that can be so strongly affected by others. And then, of course, the vulnerabilities of the body that is so often sick, that is frail, that can't develop the way that children do. And this may cause anger and anxiety within their families. And that body that needs that extra protection because of their disabilities and their vulnerabilities. And then we so often forget the vulnerabilities of their society, those children who actually are within a society that is very poor are going to be more vulnerable than a child who's within a society where there are the resources to protect them. And we often forget the vulnerabilities that come with culture. There could be cultural beliefs, there can be cultural practices that could be harmful to these children that we are caring for. And so we need to remember, a child is on a journey from the time they're born, for the whole time that they, and just like us as adults as well, we're on a further stage of our journey, but that child is on a journey. He's having to learn the things that we take for granted, how to sit, how to stand, the excitement of walking and running. He's growing and developing in what is good for him, what he doesn't like. And he's also growing in trying to understand the world around him, to understand what is happening to him or her. And when they start to talk, that interminable why is this happening? Why is this like that? And so that child grows. As they grow and develop, we need to remember they're going to start thinking differently. In the beginning, it's a very accepting of what is happening. Later on, as they understand, it's asking questions. And all that is happening to them, they need to try and understand. And we'll talk a bit later about magical thinking. And so if we're working in this field, it's not only about understanding the normal developmental issues of a child, but we also have to understand how they think, how they communicate, because words are not always the best form of communication, especially in that very young and nonverbal child. What the illness means to that child, and then what they understand about death. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. And again, it's understanding how they respond, how they cope, and most importantly, how we, when we are dealing with these children, when we're part of their world, when we're part of their lives, it's about how can we help them? Or as Andrew Lake from UNICEF said, how do we go about providing to these children the quiet miracle of a normal life? And remembering every time that every child is unique and their development is going to be as unique as they are, and that the development in children is not always age related. We have some children, yes, they do the things as we expect them to do. But for these children, often their development may be delayed or may be progressed. And so I'm not going to go into all of these pages. I'm just giving them to you so that if you want to look at the slides, that you have more detail. But we know when we're looking at these children, we have to look at the warning signs. We know what's normal, so what is warning? And so at every age, we need to be looking at where is this child not progressing the way that they should, which will make them very vulnerable. So that child whose head is very floppy, we know that we've got to protect that head and that neck. The child who's not sucking effectively, we've got to look out for malnutrition. How do we feed this child when they can't take the liquids in the way that they should? So all of these warning signs, when they start to walk, if they're not strong enough, they're going to be more exposed to injuries, to falls, and maybe to frustration on the side of their parents. Because, you know, we as parents, when our children are small, while we're looking at our own child, we're often looking at that other child as well. Is our child doing as well? So you might have parents, because it impacts on their pride in their child, who actually get angry because their little one is not progressing the way that their friend's little one is progressing. And again, it's so looking at them as vulnerable within the family, and that the people that we expect to protect them at all times often have other issues that impact on the way they protect their children. Their speech, are they developing? And people thinking that this child isn't normal because they're not talking. But we have children who develop speech in different ways and for different reasons as well. The child who's brought up in a household where they don't get lots of stimulation, where there's not lots of talking to them, where maybe there are a variety of languages and they have the added challenge of trying to pick up speech when they hear different words for the same thing. So we need to remember that. And I'm going to be telling you a few stories along the way, because I think that we need to relate these vulnerabilities to children. And I make no apologies for using children who are part of my life, because I can tell their stories so much more easily. Now, Matabu is the dearest little girl. She's actually 2 years old, and she has many vulnerabilities. As you can see that physically she is delayed. And her story is that she was one of a twin, and the other twin was a little boy. Now, within her culture, and her mother is very impacted by her culture, boys have a greater value than girls. And the little boy
I think we lost Joan.
Yeah, I was wondering whether it's my internet, but the phase of developing, so education and play are very important for them, even though they are sick. So if you, any of you has any idea or any experience working with children, maybe welcome to share until John comes back.
Hi, Ashla. This is Vandana.
Hi, Vandana.
Let me just start my video. Yes. Hi. So I have been working with children, pediatric oncology as a volunteer. So partly as a counselor, and sometimes been a part of these musical events when we go there. There's John's back.
Yes, John is back here. You're on mute, John.
I'm sorry, we had a quick power failure.
That's okay. That's okay.
Shall I try and share the screen again?
Sure.
So sorry, everybody. Are you there? Can you see it?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm pleased.
Yes,
I'll try and make up some time as well. And so she's...
You can go on slideshow.
Yes, here we are. There we go. Thanks. That's great. Okay, so she's greatly loved in the hospice. She's getting occupational therapy. She's getting well fed, lots of nourishment, lots of stimulation. Everybody loves her, the bigger children, the staff, the volunteers. She's seldom out of somebody's arms, but the challenges to her later on is that people are very hesitant of adopting or fostering a child who has any kind of developmental delay. And we have very few facilities that are suitable for that. And so Matabu she'll be with us for a little while we try and find a decent placement. But one of the many challenges that we are going to have with her is what happens as she gets older. We can give her the care now, but where do we find a place? And so, of course, we're all praying very hard for a good foster family who will take her in, where we can follow up at home, because a children's hospice is a lovely place to be, but it's not a place for a child to be in forever. And so these others, milestones, as I spoke to you about, is something that you can read and look up. There are lots of places. You can look at Piaget's theories on development, which of course are excellent. But these are all milestones where we look out for the danger signs, because those are the signs that we're going to address and we're going to put into our care plans for each and every child. Into that. And so, of course, these children have a lot of psychosocial issues. And these issues that cause their vulnerability come about when we do a holistic assessment of them and a holistic care plan. And we go about treating their total pain. And here we talk about the pain of the body, mind, or spirit. And the vulnerabilities here are manifold. So I want to talk to you about Mahanawe. Now, the sad thing about Mahanawe is that her name means unwanted. So right from the beginning, she had an extra vulnerability. The family, by naming her, and in our African culture, families give names that have meaning. So it might mean a gift, it might mean wanted, but her name from the beginning, over and above her illnesses, meant that she was unwanted. This photo was taken when she was in hospital. And I think if you just look at that face, even though you can't see the whole face, if you look at the body language, you can already see the emotions that Mahanawe is feeling. Definitely abandoned. The one place where she knows she is loved is with the hospice, but she's now in hospital. Unwanted is something that she has felt all her life because that is the meaning of her name. We never called her by Mahanawe. In fact, we called her Martha because we wanted her to have a different name with us. She's feeling rejected. Now she's in this strange place. She's in hospital where she doesn't know anybody. She's in with the strange signs. She's vulnerable to all the things that are happening to her without her understanding. She's frightened. She's sad, definitely. She's lonely. Don't just look at that body language. What does it tell you? She's experiencing grief, exhaustion, because her disease has progressed really quite extensively and has led to extra tiredness. And is she accepting? But where does accepting come? Where is it the same as just, well, this is what it is. This is what life is about. So we can see in a hospital that not just Mahanawe, or Martha as we called her, but other children who are put into the hospital environment because of their palliative care, they are vulnerable to all of these different feelings. And especially in this time of COVID, where we can't visit our children, where the family can't visit the child, where the child is in hospital in a strange environment, their vulnerabilities to all of these emotions come to the fore. So how do we help them in this time? And what are the implications for the education of hospital staff now and for the future? And so, yes, we can do WhatsApp calls, but many children who come from poor families, they don't have a cell phone. They don't have a phone they can take WhatsApp calls on. So we're very dependent on a kind staff member who will share their phone and let them have these calls. We can provide activities for play, for drawings, so that it can stimulate them to feel not abandoned. We can send them treats and gifts so that they know that they are still loved. So we are challenged to do those things and to help them in hospital. And the implications for the education of hospital staff now and for the future. There's lots of Zoom teaching, we know that. There's lots of online courses, but what we also know at this particular time is that the staff are as vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they are tired. Many of them are getting burnt out, however we want to explain that. And they really can't be bothered with Zoom teaching. They can't be bothered to do an online course. It's not that they don't know that they should be doing it, but they actually just haven't got the energy, the emotional or the physical energy to do it. We know we can give online education and ongoing education. So while we may not be doing the best that we can at present, and I'm talking from my own environment, from where I'm working here in Bloemfontein with the hospitals, with the children's hospice, with the children in the community as well. How do we provide that ongoing education? What we can do is provide staff support. And what helps the staff, we are finding, is making sure they know there is a continuum of care. That while the staff in a hospital tend to very much be blinkered, they see the child within the hospital environment and they know they're sending them home, but they tend to stop thinking about it from that period onward. And so by making sure that the staff know that when they send the child home, there is a program in the community, and that protecting this child with all their vulnerabilities is not only their job, but it's also our job as well. From talking to the staff, this is really helping them in their care for the child in the hospital. By sending them our records, by sending them a report from the community to the hospital about this child, about what we know, it is also helping that staff in their care of our hospital-based children. And we need to remember that there are 4 cultures linked to being a child. So if we look at our children, it's the culture of their own community and their family. With Mahanawe, it was a South Sutu culture and their traditions and beliefs. Like our baby beforehand, a traditional belief that if a child is not healthy, if a child is not developing the same way as other children, then witchcraft is in. This child has been bewitched. And if they've been bewitched, either you have a choice of rejecting them because you don't want this bewitchment within your community or within your family, or saying, this child is bewitched, we will go to a traditional healer and we will see what we can make right. So it's also very dependent on this family culture and an understanding as well. And then within the hospital, of course, we know a hospital has got its own culture within the whole healthcare system. And it's very much a power structure, isn't it? You know, we will tell the patients what has to be done. And it is a culture, I'm sad to say, where so often within the hospital system, even where the child can participate in decision-making, can give information, very often this is not accepted or it's not asked for. And the child doesn't have the power or the authority to say, hey, listen to me, I know what I want. I know what I want to say, because they are within this other culture. And then, of course, the culture that we provide for them within palliative care, which is often very different to their other cultures. So we come with this culture of compassion, of holistic care, of listening to the child, of helping the child to be a child. And suddenly they're taken out of that culture and they're put into the hospital system. Or they have this culture that comes from without, from their traditional family beliefs that also impacts onto this culture. And then we often forget that a child has a culture of childhood, and that childhood culture changes as the child grows and develops. And the culture of childhood has rights. The culture of childhood is allowing development. The culture of childhood allows imagination. It allows them to be a child. It allows them to play and to interact. And so if we think it's complex being within a culture, just think of these children and the vulnerabilities that they're exposed to when they're exposed to a variety of cultures that sometimes integrate and other times don't, and other times clash. And so each child has potential barriers that they have to negotiate. And these barriers are different people dealing with them. Look at this one child with a whole group of ASHA workers around him. You know, he's got large numbers of, that can be overwhelming. There could be differences in languages when you're in a community or in a society which is multicultural. So the languages that this little one understands in his own home and with the people who know him, suddenly they're gone because they're speaking a different language. And we know that medical language is a language on its own. There's separation, and they're put into strange places where the noises and the smells and the people and the procedures are all different and frightening. and they're being disrupted from their normal childhood activities of family and friends and schooling and above all play. So how do we deal with these vulnerabilities? So we look at Vasitsani, who was dying with people who cared around her in hospice. And we think this might be almost a place where there are no vulnerabilities, but there are warning signs as well, even within this photograph. So when she was dying, she wanted Father Keith, who was our amazing, absolutely outstanding chaplain, to be with her. And she said, call Father Keith. And you can see Father Keith's approach is reaching out. You can almost see the look that he has. We're only seeing him from the side, but gentle, compassionate connection. Whereas for the staff member, as Vasitsani was dying, her traditional approach was not to touch, to allow the child to go without any touch to hold her back. So we can see even within this one cot area environment, we have the clash of cultures as well. And when she was dying, she was alienated from her family, and that was the family's choice in this particular situation as well, but also cultural traditions which link her to her family. And so when we take children into the hospice, we have to be very aware that our culture can actually alienate them from their own culture. And because they're alienated, when the child dies, the family don't want to take the child and have traditional burial procedures as well. And life-threatening illness at home, what are the vulnerabilities there within the family and the culture? Again, we always say home-based care, absolutely. But sometimes when we're dealing with adolescents, we need to remember what happens with adolescents. They go to school, they mix with their friends. Adolescence has its own culture, as we know. This culture of wanting to be different, to dress like my friends dress. And then suddenly when I'm ill and when I'm seriously ill and I'm going back into the home, I'm going back into a traditional culture as well. And this can give strengths and it can give challenges. It can create a bond, but it can also create a break between generations as well. And how do we deal with the vulnerabilities of the young lady who's dying and the vulnerabilities of her mother and their different expectations and the clash of expectations? And so that vulnerability of an adolescent wanting to be more of a teenage culture, but being pulled back into the family culture and the family belief systems at a time when they're weak and they cannot fight for their own needs. And then we're seeing a different challenge with these children as well. And it might seem strange, but and I really would be interested to know whether you see this challenge. That when a child comes into a palliative care program, suddenly life is different. Coming from poverty, where they're struggling to have food on the table, where their clothes are hand-me-downs or second-hands or not as protective as they would like. And suddenly they get all these extra things. If they go into the hospital, the doctors and the nurses spoil them because they have chronic illnesses, they're in and out of hospital because of the need for treatment. And the doctor goes and he buys her a new iPhone. And the nurses and the other doctors, they give airtime. And they make sure that she has lots of treats and nice clothes because maybe she doesn't have nice night clothes for the hospital. And so what we're seeing in our chronic children, and to me, this is a great vulnerability because it breaks down their bond within the family, is that they're manipulating their condition so that they can be readmitted to the hospice or to the hospital as well. And as I say, I would be really interested to know if you're seeing this as well. And so their happy place is not home. Their happy place is being in hospice or being in hospital. And so our challenge is to help them to fly, despite their illnesses, and despite all these challenges and vulnerabilities that the children are experiencing. And we need to remember that play is essential. It doesn't matter how old that child is, play is essential. And I love this picture because each child is playing and drawing and expressing on their own. But actually you can see, even just sitting in the circle, you can see the connection, can't you? You don't have to be looking at each other. You don't have to be physically connected to actually be connected as a group. And being part of a group is essential for the child as well. And I'd like you to look at this picture for a moment or two and to read the vulnerabilities within the situation. I'm just going to give you a moment to look at it because, of course, I know the situation. This is a family that I've visited. And so I want to point out a few things to you. First of all, I think you can see that this is a family with great poverty. So cooking is done over a fire outside because there's no money for electricity. They lived in an informal settlement area where there were no power lines. So there's great poverty. The lady there, you can't see what she's doing, but it was actually heartbreaking. She had this great big bone from, I assume, from a cow, and she was scraping off every tiny bit of flesh that was in that on that bone. Part of it she hung up on the tree to dry so that they would have it to use later. Some of it was put into the pot that was on the fire because all that was in the pot was a little bit of grass and some water, and she wanted to give a little bit of flavor. Later on, that bone would be broken up and added to the pot as well to give some nourishment. The two boys on the right should have been in school, but they weren't in school. They weren't in school because they didn't have the money for school clothes. They didn't have the money for school books, and they couldn't go to school unless they had that. The two children on the far left were both our palliative care patients. But if you look at these children, normally when you see children, they're connected, aren't they? They're together. But if you look at each one of these children is separate. There's no connection between them. The two older boys are focused on looking at that pot in the fire. But the other children are totally on their own and disconnected as well. And so these are the vulnerabilities that we see within poverty. And we see a lot of poverty in India, and we see a lot of poverty in Africa. And so while we deal with their health issues, we also need to be challenged to help them deal with the vulnerabilities that come along with poverty, with getting them the school clothes, with getting them back into school, with seeing that they have sufficient food for nourishment, because you can look at those little thin legs of the little boy and you know that they are not properly nourished. And this is an auntie because their mother had died. This is an auntie looking after them. And what you can't see in the situation is there is a sick grandfather in a hut just outside of the picture. So this aunt is trying to be a mother to these boys, to provide their basic needs, to give them love, and she did, and to look after her sick father. And the psychosocial issues that we sometimes see. So if we look at this picture, two happy children, aren't they? But what are the vulnerabilities that they experience? They're happy in the moment, but they're in hospital. So they're not with their families, they're not within their communities. They were in a palliative care program. This is a picture I took in Malawi, where they have some excellent, excellent palliative care for children, despite the fact it is the poorest country in the world, according to World Bank. And if we look at the little girl with Burkitt's lymphoma, she may have some psychosocial and emotional issues around the fact that she looks different. In fact, they both had Burkitt's. You can see the one is very extreme, the other one is not so extreme. So yes, I think what we also try when we're giving palliative care, that despite the vulnerabilities, children have this great ability to enjoy the moment and to be happy in the moment. then when we're looking at their vulnerabilities, as they grow and develop, they have different understanding around death and around loss. How do we help them with this? I'm not going into all the different ages. We don't have the time, but there's certainly a lot that you can go out and read, and I'll give you a couple of references at the end as well. And so we see this change in young children. They don't understand what is happening to them. They may feel abandoned if they're taken out of the family and put into a part of the healthcare system. They may show this by crying, by being extra clinging, and we know attachment is so important for children to grow up. And attachment theory, there is so much that you can read about. And the need to know the truth. Whenever we're dealing with children, we can still share the truth. We just share it in different ways. We use different words, we use different forms of expression. But the moment you lie to a child and that child finds out that you've lied, they're not going to trust you again. So truth telling is just so important. And then, of course, we know the behavior changes as well. And communication. Communication is by word, by touch. And this is also, to me, is a lovely, lovely picture. It's actually our administrative assistant helping with bathing our baby. But you can just see the connection and the communication of love between the two of them. When they're small, they can begin to understand a little bit about death. That when they find a dead bird, it's not going to come alive again. That the bird isn't sleeping because it looks different. It's not just the fact that it's not moving and it's not breathing, but when that bird is dead, it looks different. So they understand from nature that dead is something that doesn't come back to us. But it can be at that age very challenging to us to assess the level of their understanding and their suffering linked to how they're trying to make sense. So when we see a child who's very vulnerable, how do we assess their level of suffering? Little Sammy, it was easy. His face told us everything. And then as they grow older and they start to explore the world around them and develop a sense of who they are, they understand that they belong to a family, and I use this in the broad sense. It could be a greater community group, it could be a religious group. They understand about the importance of having friends, and they can usually, not always, usually talk in some way, in some simple way, about their feelings and about the questions that they have. They use a lot of nonverbal communication. We need to encourage this. We need to allow them to express it and again, to use simplicity in all the things that we do. But this is when the child starts to understand that their body changes. And children as young as 3 can understand that their body is changing and that they are dying, and that they can show us in different ways, whether it's in wanting to say goodbye, wanting to give away their possessions, wanting to see people for the last time or see places that they want to visit. I've really seen children that young telling us they're going to die without using the words. And of course, magical thinking that we see here as well. And magical thinking is when there's a belief that something that has happened is related to something that we know logically is not the cause. But a child in magical thinking, he or she believes that they have been the cause of either their own illness or the illness or the death of another, especially of another who's close to them, like a parent. And as they get older, they start to understand the irreversibility of death, what causes death, and they start having abstract thoughts about what happens after death as well. In general, they know the difference between fantasy and reality, and so they stop thinking that they've been the cause, although they can feel guilty as well. But they can feel, at a time when children are wanting to have control, they can feel very vulnerable because they can't control what's happening to them or to someone that they love. And of course, then as they get older, become adolescents, they have a more adult understanding. But They also need a huge amount of explanation, of listening to, of allowing to express their angers and their fears through words, through dance, through drawing, through any way that is comfortable for them to express their emotion. And they show their grief and experiences differently. I'm not going to go into definitions of grief because of the time that we have, but one of the things, people think that children don't grieve deeply. So often I go into a family where the whole family is grieving and there are lots of people there and they're all supporting the adult and the child is on the side, either just sitting or sitting holding a toy or a book. But if you look at that child's attitude, if you look at that child's face, if you look at where they are in relation to the family, so often on one side, we know that they are grieving. And we need to understand that they're extra vulnerable because they grieve within a network of grief. And so their grief is part of their family, their friends, their classmates, their neighbors, and within their culture. There's this whole network. And so often the child does get forgotten and misunderstood. So it's up to us as professionals, as palliative care workers, to gather our own knowledge and understanding. And their grief behaviors can change as well, which can make them very, very vulnerable. So they can regress, that child who regresses to wetting their beds again. And of course, trying to either overachieve to show that, hey, they're going to be all right, that they're strong, or actually going back in their achievements as well. And when we get to older children, premature sexual relationships, certainly within our culture, within Africa, we see this tremendously. Either the child reaching out for the warmth and the love they feel that they're not getting, or adults who are actually abusing the situation that the child is in. And especially with our children with life-limiting conditions, our children with disabilities. I remember picking up, being referred a child of 12. And, sorry. And her openly telling me that Uncle Peter had done this and Uncle David had done this. And because she had a mental disability as well, for her it was perfectly normal that Uncle Peter came and sexually abused her, that Uncle Tom came and sexually abused her. To her it was totally normal. So that child's so very, very vulnerable because they don't have their own understanding of what is normal behavior. But children are very good at coping with grief, especially if we give them that structure within that they can grieve, by accepting and recognizing their grieving, by ensuring that either they stick to a known routine. They go to school, they go to their different groups with support, or if they don't have that routine, giving them the structure and the security of a routine and giving them that stability. And the best stability that we can give is a constant caring adult within their life experience. And that constant caring adult might be someone in the family. And we often find working in the community, that constant caring adult is somebody from the palliative care team who is going in regularly. And again, I'm not going to go into detail because this is something that you can read up. The grief in young children, where they're developing their understanding of what has happened, is very different to the grief in older children, where they understand that somebody has gone, where they understand that they are losing something. And of course, anger is often a very much an expression of their grief in this particular area. But we have to allow the grief. We have to allow the anticipatory and the actual grief. The barriers that they often face in palliative care is that we don't have the knowledge, the skills, and the understanding. And that is the challenge to us as palliative care professionals, is to go out and get that knowledge, develop those skills, develop that understanding of that child at all the different ages and stages. The other barrier is they want to be normal. They want to grow. They want to develop. They want to go to school and go through school and be with their friends. But because they have that illness and that disability, that makes them so much more vulnerable to outside influences, they can't do what they want to do. How do we help them? How do we help them to fly as high as they can within all of these restrictions? And the other barrier and the difficulty is that there may be a difficulty in expressing in words, but the biggest difficulty is in being heard. And that hearing from us can be our eyes as much as our ears. It can be that sixth sense. It can be that watchfulness about how that child changes. And so these are two very useful books that you can download on the ICPCN website. A really practical handbook of children's palliative care for doctors and nurses anywhere in the world, and Children's Palliative Care and International Case-Based Manual are both available free of charge on the ICPCN website. And there are a number of e-learning opportunities that are also free on the ICPCN website, and some are in Hindi as well. And so again, what we're trying to do when we're dealing with vulnerable children is to provide for the quiet miracle of a normal life, as normal as we can help them to enjoy it. So that's my presentation, and now I'm very happy to answer any questions or queries that you may have.
Hi. Please feel free to use chat box also if you have any questions, and you can also unmute and share. And Vandana, you were about to say something when John came back. So I would invite you to share that experience now that we have come to the close of the session.
Yes, sure. Hi, Joan. Good to see you here.
It's good to see you again.
So before, when you had a power outage, so I was just going to talk about my experience with pediatric oncology children. And I think great inputs I got from your presentation, John. So a couple of cases that I want to share with everyone. So one was this young 5-year-old with Burkitt's lymphoma. So we had done a musical program, and I did a weekly visit to the pediatric ward with a singer who played on a guitar, and we would have these 2 hours musical program. The child, because of the appearance issue, because she had a huge tumor on her face, it was so difficult to get her to open up, so difficult to get her to speak. Whereas the other children, they would, some of them, the infants would come into my arms, and some would want to dance along with me. But that particular child just wouldn't open up. So what you said about appearances is so true, because the appearance does matter to a child, because they feel, alienated from the others. And also about what you said, John, that they know about death. So this 9-year-old, towards the end of life, I get terribly emotional when I speak of him. I was counseling his father, and he called me and he says, "Can you tell my father and my mother that I'm going to die? Because I can't see them suffer like this." And it was a very heartbreaking moment, but they are so perceptive. They sense everything. And within a few hours, he moved on. And there's of an infant, just about 6 months old, and still in a diaper, taking mother's feed. And like you said about wanting to play. So this little baby, when the music was going on and when everybody was dancing, would keep indicating, with arms stretched out, "Can you hold me? I want to dance with you. I want to dance with you." And, would utter little things in her whatever, the little babyish language. So yes, I think how beautifully you've said, John, that there is so much of a difference when you deal with children, pediatric palliative patients, and adults. So thank you for that beautiful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and it's lovely to hear your stories and experiences as well, about how children understand so much more than we often think that they do. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Another one, John, that I wanted to share was of a 11-year-old. So first time I met her with blood, she was diagnosed with acute ALL, and she underwent very rigorous treatment. Her nails also fell off during chemotherapy. So all she wanted was coloring books and storybooks, an avid reader. So the toys in the children's ward would never make her happy. So I started carrying storybooks and coloring books. She would sit on her bed and she would just keep drawing. And after the treatment got over, she still sends me pictures of what she's made and little, So yes, they have different ways of expressing their pain, or maybe, just dealing with whatever's happening in their lives. So yeah, that's another one that
I think you made a point as well. I think that is really important, that when we're dealing with children, we actually need to have a goodie bag. And I mean, I always have my Eeyore puppet because he's lovely, friendly, he's gentle. A bottle of bubbles, some crayons, and a coloring book, or just some paper where they can draw. Because children so often tell you so much more when you're doing it in a form of play, or they draw what they're feeling, even the colors that they use. But they say my favorite puppet is this one.
You
put them in a bag.
He's adorable.
And maybe a warning to all of you: some toys have got really frightening faces. So don't just go into a toy shop and just buy a toy for the sake of buying a toy. Some toys are terrifying.
And also another thing that I wanted to bring out about children being spoiled. Here in India, the disparity is huge, John. There are children from affluent backgrounds. There are children from extremely, financial constraints, and children from backgrounds where poverty is the only thing they've seen. So when they come to a pediatric ward, they're showered with gifts. Yes. There is charity coming in, and there are these fancy toys, and there's fancy clothes. And it gets very difficult for the parents also, because of the difference in their way of living. So it becomes a challenge for the parents, because some of them do get better and go back. Most of them will get better and go back. So how would you suggest, we deal with this situation?
Well, we're really getting this channel. We've got, especially at the moment, we've got a little girl with a really bad diabetic, and her family love her dearly, and she loves her family, but we know that, that she manipulates her insulin, because she does her own testing now. She does her own insulin, because she'll be back in hospital where she'll get spoiled. Then the social worker will say she can't stay with her mother because the mother isn't looking after her properly. And then they send her back to Sunflower House, and we sit with this circulation, and we know that it's linked to that. And she's had counseling, and we try and say to people, don't give her, now when she comes back, don't give her anything extra. She's had all that she needs. She's got a cell phone, she's got pretty clothes. But it's very hard not to as well, when you know their life is going to be limited. So I don't quite know. I think the only thing is not to do it, but then it's a natural thing to want to give them that spoiling, especially when their life is going to be short. I mean, we have a Christmas in July each year, because we say these children are not going to have many Christmases, so we want to give them extra Christmases. It's really a challenge, and I think we need to do a bit more, maybe get some narratives from different places and see how people are dealing with it. And I'd really be very interested to know how you do it, because It took us a while to realize we were being manipulated.
I mean, in spite of whatever's going on with them, John, I think children can make you, run around on their commands and their
Absolutely.
wishes. So,
And you love them so much, that
yes.
you allow it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that reminds me of two siblings we used to have here with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. My colleagues must be knowing. And then when they come for when they have a severe pain, they come for an admission, and then they're like, they own the whole like organization, institution, and then we are like, okay, today if they want to sit with a class chair, okay, they sit there and then they play with them, and then next day they are into the accounts department, the next day they are in with the
Yeah.
CEO. So it's like they are everywhere and they enjoy being here. And then like end of the week, once the pain medication is over and then their symptoms are under control, they don't want to go back home. And the younger one is actually going to school and he wants to skip the school and come and stay with the elder brother so that he can be here also.
Mm.
So we also see that kind of situation.
Yeah.
And then your experiences reminded me of them.
And then
Maybe-
they have demand. I'm sorry.
No, carry on. No, please
And
carry
then,
on.
and then they have these demands, John, when gifts are brought into the ward and a certain gift is given to them. So they'll say, no, I don't want this. I want the other
Yes,
one. So
that's right.
that is another challenge. How do you tell them that that's not okay to be doing, for them to be doing that? So they start demanding. So I think, I mean, really don't know how this challenge should be handled, but it's an issue. And at times you just give in because they're kids. So you just give in.
Wouldn't that be a great research project for us to do
Yes.
across country?
Oh, yes.
Because we've created the monster, to be honest, because, and it's done out of love, it's done out of compassion, it's done out of wanting to do the best for these children. And only seeing the effect maybe a bit later on. And I don't think it's
Thank you,
I don't
John.
think it's going to be easy to change it. Sorry,
very difficult. Thank you, John.
Sorry, I interrupted. No, Avatar has got some couple of comments, so I would like, if possible, to unmute and speak. Avatar.
Yes, Miss. Hi, John.
Hi,
Actually, I voluntarily work for an organization who work for the children who are suffering from cancer and all. So I usually find very disappointing when I see faces of their parents who are in such a denial mode that their child is going to die. But sometimes I see a child who is very much understanding about the facts that he or she is going to die, but parents are in denial. I don't know how we should or I should comfort them or tell what is really going to happen. And I'm really at lost here. That's all. That's all.
Yes, after it's something that we see really very commonly, and I think that's it's not all. Sometimes with the parents, it's not really denial; it's protection. And you see situations where the parents are trying to protect their child from the reality, and if they don't talk about it, then they see that as a form of protection. And the child often tries to protect the parents, so you get this concept of mutual protection that Myra Blubon Langner wrote about so beautifully in her private life of dying children. And the only way that I've found to really deal with it is to have conversations, allow the child. That's so important, that the child needs to be able to express, and then very gently to tell the parent what the child has told you. And see that, because often that breaks the barrier, that they realize that the child knows that he is dying, and so they can actually acknowledge it themselves as well. But having said that, I've also seen situations where the child talks to you about the dying, the parents talk to you about the child dying, and they both refuse to talk to each other. So even with the best counseling, and you need to deal with both. You need to deal with the family. You need to offer to be there with them to discuss the whole issue, because sometimes that's what they need, is they need a facilitator between them and their own child. It sounds funny, but sometimes they just do need that outside person. And sometimes the parents just need that bit of extra time to come to terms with the fact that their child is dying. So I just gently tell them, this is what the child has told me, but also respect that they need more time to actually to stop denying. But often that denial is a protective mechanism and a search for, there must be a cure. There must be something that can be done.
Thank you, John.
Easy answers, I'm sorry, after it. And it's always a process as well. It's not something that you can do in one sitting. It's a process.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Shreya, you can unmute and talk.
Yeah. Good afternoon. This is Prasanna Shreya from Chennai.
Hello there.
Hello. 2019, I saw 3 children when I saw the topic as children and vulnerability. So my question is, or my observation is, and I want your inputs. I saw 3 children lose their fathers, one for cancer, and he was kept at home. So he was having his treatment at home. The other member, the other person, my college junior, he was totally in ICU. So from Orissa, he was shifted to Delhi. And the children didn't see him at all. It was almost September. It started with September that he went to the hospital. And by December, he passed away. And this was due to pancreatic necrosis and septicemia. And the age group of this children is, they are twins, a boy and a girl. Now they are 11. So they were 9 years old. Mm-hmm. And the child who lost her father for renal cancer, she was 6 years old. Now she's 8. And another child, now she's 20. All happened in 2019. And she lost her father from a bison attack. I see all the 3 display their fear or anxiety, or they are closed, how close they have become after it. Being children, the first thing what they fear is the younger ones, and not the 20-year-old. They think that next parent, the mother will be the next target. She would die next. Yeah. So they cling on. That is the age group 11. Currently they are 11, the twins. Whereas the 8-year-old, she's surrounded with children and her relatives. So she still doesn't ask for her father, but she doesn't like to see her mother sad. So she comes and tells her verbally very clearly, I hope you're not sad and you're not upset with me and you're not sad by yourself. And that's about it. And she doesn't like to be questioned about her father. She's very, very clear, very strong-willed. The third, the 20-year, she's taken up her medicine now and she's actually away from the family. The day she spoke to her dad, in the morning she spoke on March 19th, 2019, she spoke to her dad. And I think by afternoon, he's no more. So she says, I'm in a time lapse. I don't even know how to come out of it. I don't know how to process it. I want help, but I don't know how to seek help. I try to help this child only by texting. We don't talk. I know her as a childhood, from her childhood. When she was about 8-year-old, I knew her then, but not as a teenager. And I'm not a counselor. I'm good with kids. That's it. My only USB is I'm good with kids. I crack jokes or I make funny stuff. I go with their blend. I become a child myself. So in fact, for the senior most child, for the 20-year-old, I have named her, her name is Jacqueline, and I have named her as Jack Yoga Bunny. So Bunny is a name I have given her, and I call myself as fish out of water. I'm 47 years old. I call myself as fish out of water. And I ask her, what does she like? She says she can relate herself to the Nemo character. So she calls herself as clownfish. I mean, how each of us take a protection in our own self. Age doesn't matter. Where I feel, no, the 20-year-old has become very small, where this 8-year-old has become wise as an owl. She doesn't want to talk. That's the way she protect herself.
Mm.
And how will they grieve? Will they grieve at all, or will this thing will be frozen in their life forever?
Prasanna, I think first of all, I'm really impressed by the way that you've not only observed but interacted with these children. So I think you have a real gift for this. I think what you're doing is, you're allowing them and respecting that everybody grieves in their own way, and there is no timeline to grief. And you also, there's observation that the one became a child again, looking for comfort and support and fun and a new name and a new, almost a new kind of identity when she's with you. Whereas the 8-year-old has got that deeper understanding. And I think the first thing is every child is going to grieve differently. Every child is going to have their own timeline of grief. So some might come to acceptance really quite early on. Yes, daddy's dead and I'm really sad and I'm going to cry. That grief isn't something that is absolutely linear, that we can go for a time feeling okay, and then we go back to feeling intensely sad. There are going to be lots of triggers. And I think with each one of these that you've identified, they must be allowed to follow their own timeline of grief and recognize that 8-year-old who's so wise now, when she becomes a teenager and she sees her friends with their daddy who's taking them to parties, or even thinking about getting married with the time that it really hits her, that is just to allow them to know that each one is, their grieving is okay, that the way they grieve is fine. It's the way that they need to grieve. And to just be that constant support, because as I said earlier, what people need, what children need of all ages, is a constant caring presence. And if we can be constant and we say, that's okay, you can be a child again, that's okay, you can be sad, that's okay, you can be frightened, you can reassure that mommy's healthy now, mommy's well, she's not sick. You can keep on telling them that, but it's something they've got to come to in their own time. So I think you're doing exactly the right thing, and just continue to be that presence in their life.
Certainly. But my thing of how to make them secure when they think the second parent also will be lost, because I had it when I lost my dad recently in 2020. I thought I'm going to lose my mom, and I went really, really insane. I did nothing to bring her back from Kodaikanal to be with me. I thought the further she's away from me, the more I started being hypervigilant and started thinking the worst. So as a 47, I couldn't take. How was a 28 and an 11-year-old feel that the mother will not go and the mother will be the, what sort of assurance should the mother give or the environment should give?
Well, the mother can just keep on saying, look, I'm here, I'm healthy, I love you, I'm never going to stop loving you. That's the only way you can keep on reassuring from the mother's side. But certainly from I think what you're saying is it's normal to feel like that. It's to say to the child, it's normal to feel like that. You've lost your daddy, and it's okay to feel like that. All we can say to you is that mommy is okay. We can't tell you, we can't give you absolute confirmation for the future, although I wouldn't say that to a small child.
Yes.
But it's something, it's a feeling they've actually got to go through. And by having you there, by having their mother just reiterating, I'm here, I'm not leaving you, I'm feeling well today. It's a process. Grief is never, ever a quick one-off. It's always a timeline, it's a process. And I can say personally, my daughter who lives in the the British Isles, from the time that COVID lockdown came in South Africa, she has called me every single day to see that I'm okay. Because in the back of her mind, she's got this fear that something's going to happen to her mom while we're so many miles apart and she can't come. So what you're all experiencing is actually perfectly normal. And to say to the child, it's okay, it's normal to feel like that. What can I do to help you? What's going to make you feel better? And nothing's going to make them feel better except just seeing that mommy is okay, mommy's still there. They'll just learn to live with that anxiety, and later on they'll get over it. But it takes time.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Hello.
We only have 5 more minutes. So there is Parul who wants
Yeah.
to share something. Parul.
Yes, I would definitely like to share about the children whom I interact normally during my rounds for the cancer patients, and I call them. They are all the twinkling stars. So these twinkling stars, and I find them. That I learn so much from them. It is one of the patient we had was Victor. Now, after a very successful bone marrow transplant, he's just 4.5, and with the support from one of the corporate, he celebrated his first birthday. And it was really a very touching sight to see him cut the cake. And we said, here is victory to Victor Hazarika, the child patient. And the parents, you could see the joy and the glitter in their eyes when he celebrated this first birthday. So that was one of a touching moment. And I find that this, because we have many patients coming from the northeastern states where music and dance is the lifeline for them. So when any occasion is there, they just take advantage of that, and they are dancing around. You should see them dancing during the Bihu festivals, which are celebrated throughout the year 4 to 5 times. And nobody can, even recognize that these are patients. Some of my donors, they question, are these the patients? That is what is, they are full of life. And another is the one of the donor had donated playgroup equipments for the kids. And imagine them jumping on that buggy, jumping and, laughing their heart out. And I sent the pics to the donor. She was so happy because she herself is childless. But seeing the joy when the children are utilizing this playgroup equipment is something to really be experienced. And I really enjoy. And when I miss out around, the kids are there, why didn't you come during the last session? So I never expected that they are observing me so close. So that's really very, very lovely session, Madam, which you have shared today. And children teach us so much about life.
Carol, you're so right. They do, and they give us so much joy.
Yes.
So, people outside think, oh, palliative care for children, it must be so sad. I say, you'd be surprised at the laughter and the joy that we experience. And as you said, we learn from the children. They are our teachers. We are the pupils.
So on the World Cancer Day also, we had the 3 children there with the posters of positivity, positive vibes only. And another with the sunflower, reflecting the positive symbol, that we are strong and we will go through this. So it was really nice to see their faces glowing with that.
And our children's hospice unit is called Sunflower House for that reason, that the sunflower is such a bright and happy flower.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ashla. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing, Pearl.
Yeah, welcome, madam. And madam, please let me know about the Palchase also, because I would definitely, like to, because I tried connecting last time, but I couldn't go through. I couldn't access it.
Okay, I'll
I send you the link in the.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I will share it along with the learning points this week. Manisha, please note that. Okay. John will be sharing it. And so it's time to close the session. Thank you so much, John. For me, it is like personally, like I was while Mandana and Prasanna was sharing about children losing their father and worrying about mother, and then the elder one becoming child and the younger one becoming so wise and grown up suddenly. I was thinking about myself. I lost my dad at the age of 8, and then my sister was 15 then, and then it was the same situation with at my home also. It was like she suddenly became so dependent, and I was like, I was asked to be grown up. So for me, it was always the same case. And then when I became a teenager and in my 20s, I felt so jealous when I met these my classmates and they're having good time with their dads, and I didn't know how to be in the presence of a father as a teenager or as a 20-year-old. So it was very difficult. So maybe Prasanna, for me to say that it will always be there, and all you can do is to be there for those children as a presence, and then ensure them that okay, it's okay to feel all this, as John said, because we will be having all these doubts. It's okay to be feeling all these. So thank you, John, for bringing out all these vulnerability for these children and how vulnerable they are and how they go through all these situations. So thank you so much, John, for all these insights. I learn a lot from you during every session, every single session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
So,
you,
Manisha,
everybody.
over to you.
Thanks again, John. Thanks a lot for being with us and taking your